This is a bait that I have used and I've caught quite a few fish on, but for some reason or another, it's not my go-to. You know, a lot of people look at that egg section and like, okay, that's why I'll hook it right there. Well, it's not what you want to do on this worm. On that Wacky Sticko, that's why we put that smooth section right in the middle. My biggest takeaway from it is that I'm gonna start using that 5-inch Sticko a lot more in my own fishing Wacky rig. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the garage. And this is actually going to be a 3-part video series, and wanted to talk about some stuff of different baits and different rigs and kind of how they look underwater. Actually, the 3-part series will cover 3 different rigs, but each rig really got 4 or 5 different baits that actually rigged on them, all the same, but then wanted to just kind of compare and contrast, you know, different bait styles on the same rig, ones that are what they do really good, ones that, you know, act a little bit different, and you know, just really want to look at that. And honestly, this was something I wanted to know. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see it firsthand underwater and really see what these baits look like, and hopefully it'll help me apply them better in my fishing. So I wanted to see this to kind of learn from it. So I thought we might as well share it with you all as well. So that's kind of what this is for this first part. This first one is going to be about the Wacky rig and putting different baits on a Wacky rig, and a lot of baits that I use at different times. And sometimes I feel like they're interchangeable. Sometimes one is noticeably better, you know, for the way that I'm fishing at that point in time or how the fish are set up. And as I go through each one of them, I'll kind of give a little bit of past reference of, you know, an application where one bait on that rig seemed more productive for me than another. So we'll kind of go through that as well as we get into this. But yeah, first up, the Wacky rig. Actually, this is still a Nico that I've got hooked on here, so we'll go back to a Wacky. You know, but I've done several videos on how to fish a Wacky. You know what a Wacky rig is, all that kind of stuff, and I've had some videos do really well with that. Wacky rig is obviously a very productive rig, a very you know, a fish producer, man. It catches a lot of fish. Obviously, primarily a shallow water deal, no weight in a Wacky. If you're truly Wacky rigging, it is weightless. But the baits that I Wacky rigged for this video, I've got 5 different ones. So I've got a Wacky Sticko right there. All these, of course, all these soft baits are Bass Pro stuff. But I've got a Wacky Sticko. I've got a regular Finneck worm. I used the same worm for Nico in a little bit, but just a regular Finneck worm. I used a 4-inch Sticko. I did a 5-inch Sticko, and I did a Magnum Finneck worm. So those 5 different baits are the ones that I Wacky rigged in the pool. We got underwater of, and then I've got me a whole list of notes here of each one and kind of what they each did, and the differences in them. So first up, the Wacky Sticko. That was the very first one that we put in the pool, and you know, this is a bait that I've caught tons of bass on a lot of different situations. Actually, our most recent tournament as of filming this was on the Chowan River, and caught a lot of fish out there around those cypress trees throwing a Wacky Sticko, primarily Sooner Run color. This one is green pumpkin blue flake. But for the Wacky Sticko, it had a slight shimmy. I'll be honest, I honestly thought fishing this bait and just looking at it in the water that it has more of a shimmy than what we saw in the pool. And that, you know, some of this again actually will vary a little bit with the color of the bait, because the different colors truly are different densities, different layers of softness, you know, so different baits actually will act, or the same bait but different colors will actually act a little bit different from time to time. But what we saw of this particular one, it had a slight shimmy, you know, so those ends of the worm kind of shimmying as it fell. I would call it slight. It was a kind of in the medium range for the fall rate as well. Some stuff was quicker, some stuff was a little bit slower of the baits we tested. One nice thing with the Wacky Sticko is that with a gentle rod tip shake, those ends of the worm quivered pretty easily. Not a big drastic, you know, the worm wasn't folded in half kind of thing, but the ends of that worm did quiver, you know, very gently, or very easily on just a really slight rod tip shake. So that was something that was, I think, was really key with that Wacky Sticko, and is honestly a way that I catch a lot of fish on that is, as that bait's sinking or once it gets to the bottom, just really gently quivering that rod tip. Let's see. Next up was the 5-inch, 5-inch Sticko. Was the next bait we tested, and I'll say, for me personally, this is a bait that I have used and I've caught quite a few fish on, but for some reason or another, it's not my go-to wacky rigging. It is a little bit longer wacky bait than that Wacky Sticko. I think the Wacky Sticko is 4.5. That 5-inch Sticko is like 5 3/8. So it is a little bit longer bait. And I have caught, when I use this, I catch a lot of fish on it. But for some reason, the Wacky Sticko is kind of my go-to. But here's what I saw on that 5-inch, just the standard 5-inch Bass Pro Sticko. It had a really, really good shimmy on the fall. This is the Magic, or might call it Green Pumpkin Blue Swirl, Magic Cross Swirl. Again, a soft one, but I do think there are some other colors in their lineup that could be a little bit softer. Really, really good shimmy. Really, really good shimmy on the fall. And this worm, being as soft as it is, when you would pull it, man, the ends would almost come all the way together. You could almost see those ends coming all the way together. And then it had just a slightly slower fall than the Wacky Sticko. The Wacky Sticko definitely fell a little bit quicker, just watching it in there, than what this 5-inch Sticko did. But they were close. But that 5-inch was just a little bit slower. And I think that's got to do probably with the salt content, as well as that 5-inch Sticko being a little bit bigger bodied bait, but a little bit longer. It's going to catch a little bit more water and have a little bit more drag to it. So kind of what we saw there. Next up was just the standard Fennec worm. One we had for that was just a bubblegum color. And it's a pretty soft one. I mean, you can see just hanging it there on my thumb. I mean, it's folded all the way basically in two. So a very, very soft color and just the regular Fennec worm. Obviously, it being a really thin, pretty lightweight worm, it was the slowest fall of anything that we tested wacky rigging. Not much weight to that worm as far as what's poured in it. So definitely the slowest fall. Very, very bendy. It was kind of, I didn't know a better way to put that in my notes. Yeah, very bendy. You pull that thing, the ends would come all the way together, and then it would open back up. So what that means is that you can move that bait just, kind of the length of the worm, and it's going to fully close, fully open up, fully close, fully open up. So a lot of movement in that. One thing in particular to point out about the Fennec worm is that this is truthfully one of the most uneven worms as far as just kind of the amount of water restriction, the weight, everything end to end on the worm. On the top section of it, fairly thick and uniform, but then on the back it gets real thin and it's got that bubbly tail. If you are wacky rigging this worm, a lot of people look at that egg section like, okay, that's why I'll hook it right there. Well, it's not what you want to do on this worm. On that Wacky Sticko, that's why we put that smooth section right in the middle. Makes it really easy. You know exactly where to hook it. Just hook it literally in the middle of that smooth section. On the Fennec worm, as well as truthfully the 5-inch Sticko, you want to hook it more lengthwise, truthfully in the middle of the worm. If you hook it right in that egg section, it's going to be like this, and it's going to want to spin on you. So it's not going to fish the way that it should. It's not going to it's not going to fall horizontal, it's not going to fish horizontal, all those kind of things. So just make sure when you're hooking it that you're hooking it behind that egg section, truthfully more in the middle lengthwise of the worm. It's a really important thing with the Fennec worm. I have caught a lot of bass on that Fennec worm, wacky rigged. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it is a really, really slow fall. It being slower than a standard 5-inch stick worm, than that Wacky Sticko. I'm going to use this in really, really shallow water. Those places where I'm fishing a foot and a half, maybe as deep as 2 feet deep. I have caught them deeper on it. If you just have to be really, really patient. But I've caught a lot of fish in places where other people were throwing a more traditional wacky worm, but I come behind them with that Fennec worm fishing slower, just a slower drop, and catch a lot of fish behind them, especially those really, really shallow ones. Think of a lot of really shallow bedding fish. that I've caught on that worm fishing it that way. So that's kind of a tip with it with your wacky worm fishing. Let's see. Next up, number 4, the wacky or not wacky, but the Magnum Fennec worm. This is a worm I use all the time on a Texas rig. I truthfully don't wacky rig it that much myself. It kind of like the regular Fennec worm. The egg sac is towards the top of it. So again, you want to make sure that you're hooking this more in the middle of the worm if you're going to use it. But you know, this was one that actually looking at it underwater, it had a really good shimmy to it on the fall, just weightless on the fall. Man, this thing had a really, really good shimmy. And this was one going back and looking at the underwater footage. You know, the Wacky Sticko was round, 5-inch Sticko is round, 4-inch we'll get to here in a minute, it's round. The Magnum Fennec and the regular Fennec both have a flat side to them. It's really small on that Fennec worm. I don't think it makes much difference. But on this Magnum worm, it's a big enough pronounced flat side that something I didn't think about or didn't, and I've still not looked at as we're shooting this, would be your actual hook placement. You know, so if you put the flat side down and run your hook through there, or if you hooked it top to bottom, flat side, bottom to top, you could get an exaggerated difference. It may not make any difference. I truthfully just don't know. But you know, it does have that pronounced flat side, and that could really alter the way this bait ends up fishing. But just the way I had it rigged, it had a very good shimmy. It wasn't as fast of a fall as the Wacky Sticko. It was pretty close to the 5-inch Sticko, maybe just a touch slower. So I'd put it somewhere between the 5-inch Sticko and the Fennec worm as far as the fall rate of it. It ended up being somewhere right in there. And then it is, you know, you can see that like it compared to the Fennec, it's not quite as bendy, as soft. So when you're pulling it through the water, you know, it's gonna collapse down pretty good, but not even quite as much as that 5-inch Sticko. So really good action still, truthfully not as stiff as the Wacky Sticko, but definitely a very good soft worm, a little bit bigger, a little bit meatier profile, and had a good fall to it. Last one that we tested was the 4-inch Sticko, just a regular 4-inch Sticko, and definitely this is just the watermelon color, which is in my opinion, one of the harder colors in that bait. I wish I would have gotten a Sooner Run out and would have tested it with a Sooner Run, because I feel like the action would have been a little bit more pronounced with that Sooner Run color being a little bit softer, but we had this watermelon one. Most noticeable thing about the 4-inch Sticko, it was the fastest fall of any of them. I think it's a very heavily salted bait, and then probably this color being a little bit even more dense than some of the other colors made it fall really fast. But yeah, definitely the fastest falling bait of the 5 that we tested in the pool. So fell really quick, and truthfully had the least amount of action. It didn't have a whole lot of shimmy on the fall. When you would twitch that bait, the ends didn't fold in a whole lot. It had the least amount of action of any of them wacky rigged. I catch lots and lots and lots of bass on a 4-inch Sticko. Most of it is with either on a VMC rugby head or on a Texas rig. Catch a whole lot of bass on this thing. And I have caught fish on it wacky rigged when I really need a smaller profile and I needed to get down quick. I think of some of the times we fished up on, up on some smallmouth water, Great Lakes and that kind of stuff. And I wanted something weightless, but I wanted something to get down there pretty quick. I needed to get down 3 or 4 or 5 feet deep, with a wacky style presentation. And those were times when I would throw that 4-inch Sticko and rig it wacky. But yeah, so that is a time when it has paid for me in the past. But man, this is a fun experiment for me, and something that I have definitely learned a lot from. And my biggest takeaway from it is that I'm gonna start using that 5-inch Sticko a lot more in my own fishing wacky rigged. I'm not gonna retire the Wacky Sticko by any means, because I catch a lot of bass on it, and I think that little bit smaller profile at times will probably get bites and maybe a few more bites than some other stuff. But I'm going to start applying that 5-inch sticko personally and a lot more of my fishing Wacky in than I have been in the past. So that's my biggest takeaway from it myself. So again, like I mentioned, this is going to be a 3-part series. This was the first one of it, so be sure you come back and check out the other ones. But until then, make sure you like, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.